Victorian buildings shipped down en masse from Britain in about the 1870s. But you might have noticed that the traditional roofing material for the Falklands is actually corrugated tin. There are different materials being used now, but essentially you've probably noticed our treeless landscape. Building materials have never been an easy thing or cheap thing to come by. So traditionally timber framed buildings would be shipped down and the corrugated roofs added to it. This is the Christchurch Cathedral, consecrated in 1892. Thanks to the cathedral, we are officially a city. And the Whalebone Arch, which leads us to be twinned with the town of Whitby in England, which has a similar whalebone arch, which is the jaw of a blue whale. Just coming past the Falkland Island Company West Store, if any of you got any shopping to do, then this is the place to come. And on our right is Victory Green. Keep a lookout for the mast of the Great Britain. The Great Britain was an old steamship, the original steamship that ended up here in the Falklands, severely damaged, and was used as a wool warehouse for many years. But in 1969 or 1968, she was towed back to England and now lies in the town of Bristol, where she has been fully restored. So that's the mast there on the right. Shipping used to be a very important thing for the Falklands, because before the Panama Canal opened, we were right here for all the ships coming around Cape Horn. But as a result, there are well over 100 wrecks in the Falklands. A lot of them would limp around Cape Horn and either get wrecked here or already come in damaged. On the left is our police station, the St. Mary's Cathedral, which is the Catholic church and was also a kit building. Our town hall on the right, Philatelic Bureau if anyone's interested in stamps. So the population of the Falklands is about of Stanley is about 2,500. Here on the right is the dockyard. The new museum building has just been. You're not going to have a chance to go to the museum, but it is going to be moved down here. It is the historic heartland of Stanley. It's where the very first buildings, that little building we just passed, Gilbert House, is the seat of the Legislative Assembly, and it was one of the very, very first buildings built in Stanley in 1842. Liberation Monument. This commemorates our liberation from, well, let's just say it ended the Falklands conflict in 1982. And if anyone would like to get out and have a look around, then please do. We can stop for about 5 minutes. Does anyone want to? We can carry on. The conflict was very brief, only 70 days, but it has left a bit of an indelible mark on all of us. So we sometimes say things a bit inappropriate, but you can let me know if I do. On our left here is the hospital, the King Edward Memorial Hospital. We do have free health services run on similar lines to the National Health Service in UK. It suffered a terrible fire in 1984. A number of people were killed, but it has since been rebuilt. But for any serious medical issues, we do have to go abroad, either to Santiago in Chile or to UK. It means that our doctors here have to be pretty wide-ranging general practitioners. And then on your left you can see, well, this is the local football field. The large building at the top is the Falkland Island Community School, that's the senior school, and the community centre. It was the first major development that we built with our fishing money, as we call it. It's got about 160 pupils. But here, we've got on our left is Government House. This building started being built in about 1845, but the governor did not take up residence until around 1855, 1859. It started off as a small building, but you can probably tell it's had a lot of additions built onto it since. And for us, one of the most remarkable things about it is that what you can see growing in the conservatory is actually grapes, which do produce grapes. Yeah, no, it is quite amazing. So we have a governor, as you might have gathered. That's part of our make-up as an overseas territory, is that we do have a governor which is appointed by Her Majesty's government in UK, and the role of the governor is dual. On the one hand, they've got to represent our views to the British government, and on the other hand, they've got to represent the British government here in the Falklands. And the governor has an important role to play in terms of regulating, but the governor has got no vote. The entire decisions of Executive Council are made by Falkland Island Assembly members, and although the governor chairs that council, he has no vote. If he thought we were doing something really terribly wrong, he would write to the Secretary of State and tell him that we were doing something dreadfully wrong. I don't think he's had any requirement to yet, but you never know.
What was that monument we just passed?
Sorry? Oh yes, we are going to come around, I can tell you about that. That's the 1914 Battle Memorial, which we still commemorate on the 8th of December each year. It represented the defeat of the German fleet by the British fleet in 1914. A major battle which pretty much ended the German fleet's ambitions in the South Atlantic. We're on Racecourse Road, so named because you can't quite see it, but behind it there is the racecourse. Really, up until about 20 years ago, when we started building roads, everything was done on horseback. Most of us pretty much grew up on horseback, so this meant that racing was a very popular sport. Everyone used to bring their old farm horses in and have a gallop up and down the course. People have got more serious about it now. There is a stallion out there that was given to us by Sheikh Makutma in about 1996, and people have been using him to really improve the bloodline of their horses. So we do have thoroughbreds racing now. So the days of the old farm plod have gone. And in actual fact, really horses have largely been replaced by motorbikes and by vehicles. We are quite keen on our sports here for a small population. This year in July, the Island Games in Bermuda were held, and there were about 60 athletes went from here. We are limited in what we can do, but we sent a swimming team and a golf team and a badminton team and a football team and some runners, and we of course came last in everything, but we really enjoyed it anyway. We're just passing the museum on the left. Obviously don't have time to have a look at it today. The building it's in used to be the building of the Argentine Air Commodore when we did have a relationship with Argentina. Their main representative was housed there. I was told that when they were looking through the building after the conflict, they found a final demand on the building from a Brazilian company, so we suspect it's never actually been paid for. So coming up Ross Road West, you see on the left, coming along, one of our used to be very, very fine examples of the types of wreck we had here. She's a Jhelum. She was an East Indiaman, and really the last type of... Are you okay? The last example of her kind, but very sadly, we don't know when, but in the course of the last 30 years, most of the old wooden wrecks here have been attacked by the teredo worm. I don't know if you know what the teredo worm, but it's a little boring worm that in fact inspired Isambard Kingdom Brunel on how to build tunnels, and they've effectively destroying all of these old wooden wrecks. So in a storm about 4 years ago, the Jhelum was cut completely in half, and in another storm about 4 weeks ago, really, that's how she ended up. We're very sad because we're very fond of her. If you look across to the other side of the harbour, probably can't see them now, I'll talk about it later. So yes, just coming up to the Liberation Monument, we have a parade here on the 8th of December. We have our Liberation Day for 1982 on the 14th of June, and this is on the 8th of December. So this is actually the next year is going to be the 100th anniversary, and we have to decide what we do after that. On our right, well, you'll be able to see as we're coming down, well, we can see the building here on the right behind the gorse hedges. Further up the hill, you'll be able to see the satellite dishes. We do have modern communications here. We do have internet, we do have mobile phones, but you sort of have to take a mortgage out to have the internet. And if you've got teenage daughters, like I do, then it is actually a lot more than your mortgage, your monthly bills. So constant reason for argument in most households. Still, we like to complain about it because as a population, as most populations, there are favourite things to moan about. So yes, we moan about the price of fruit and vegetables, and we moan about the cost of the internet. And all in all, I don't think they're too bad of things to moan about. So I was talking earlier about the role of the governor. We do have a legislative assembly. We have elections every 4 years. We just had our last election on the 7th of November. We don't have any political parties. Individuals stand in their own right. There's 8 of them who sit on the assembly, and then those 8 choose from amongst their number 3 to sit on executive council. The issue with being in a small overseas territory like we are is that although this is a small town, a very small population of only 3,000 people, yet the infrastructure requirements, the legislative requirements, and all of those things you still have to have whether you've got 3,000 people or 10,000 people. So it's in fact a very, very busy role. The British government is responsible for our foreign relations and our diplomatic affairs, but other than that, we are entirely responsible for everything else. The community school was built in 1992, as I said, with our first fishing license revenues. It cost 12 million pounds at the time, and it was a frightening time for everyone concerned, because we'd never had so much money to spend before, and spending that amount of money on one building was quite daunting at the time. We've also just passed the power station. We have a wind farm, which you will see on the way out to when you go to the airport later on today, which actually is providing us with around 40% of our energy requirements in Stanley, and it's supplemented by 2 diesel generators. In camp, the farmers, they all have their own little wind generators and inverters for converting that wind into domestic electricity. It's common practice in the Falklands, here in Stanley, for people to keep their own hens for eggs and to grow their own vegetables. You can pretty much grow any type of usual vegetable. A lot of people will have polytunnels or other forms of protecting the more delicate types of vegetable. But if you manage it cleverly, you can keep yourself going for most of the year in some type of vegetable. You can probably tell by the feel in the air, but we've got a very temperate climate, really. I mean, it's our average temperatures in the summer is around 15 degrees centigrade, so it's not hot. But then in the winter, it's not that cold either. Temperatures below 0 are not a daily occurrence. Some of you might be interested in having a look here. We've got the building on our right is owned by a local man who's very, very keen on protection of the whales. So you can see the number of whale bones he has. There's a minke and a sperm. He does sometimes have a reindeer from South Georgia, but he doesn't seem to be around at the moment. And just further up in the hill, you can see his peat bank that he's got there. His stack of peat. Peat for the Falkland Islanders was actually our only source of fuel. 100% of homes had peat, and the first Monday of October is still a holiday for us. It's peat cutting Monday. And traditionally, that's when everyone was given a day off to go and start cutting their peat, because a typical household would need around 200 cubic yards of peat, and a really good peat cutter could probably only cut about 50 cubic yards a day, and that would be fairly incredible to achieve that much. Your average person wouldn't have been able to do that. So for people, cutting peat was one of the roles for spring. They had to, we'll pass a peat bank later on, but essentially at the end of the season in March, you would have to cart it in and either put it in a peat shed or build a nice little pile in your garden and hope that it would keep you going for the rest of the year. There aren't really any. There's only about three households now which are still using peat as their main source of fuel. Most of us are using kerosene. Up on the far right, you can see in the distance, that's where they are building 200 new homes. This is all in response to the development of an oil industry, which seems likely now to be going ahead. We won't know until 2017 for sure. That's when the first commercial wells are being drilled. But the exploratory wells that were drilled over the last 2 or 3 years have been very promising. So one of the things that we have to consider now as a community is the potentially big change that might come here. We're all got our concerns, although obviously we welcome having extra income at our disposal. We are also very concerned about how we're going to preserve the Falklands. It's undergone such enormous changes in the last 30 years, and presumably we'll undergo many more. One of the things we obviously have to worry about is how we maintain our cultural identity. If there is a lot of immigration, we have to worry about how we're going to actually manage that, and the level of infrastructure and so on that we're going to actually need to cope. The standard of living is good here in the islands. It is fairly typical for people to have more than one job. Many people have 2 or 3 jobs, and largely, it's partly because they like to earn the extra cash, but also simply because there is such a demand for example, doing something like this. We've just passed our agricultural and fisheries department, our 2 principal industries, along with tourism. And as you see, we're just going past the back of the industrial estate, all those vehicles. One of the challenges we have in the Falklands is what we do with our rubbish, essentially, and it's principally old vehicles. Waste management for any country is a difficult issue, and that includes us. Large warehouses there at the back is the seat of the Falkland Islands, the quarters of the Falkland Islands Defence Force. We do have our own little defence force, which is, although it's all volunteers, they are extremely well trained. It's our contribution to our defence. We have at Mount Pleasant Airfield, we have our entire defence is situated there. Probably about something like 2,000 soldiers on the ground, and that's obviously provided by the British government. We hope we don't need it. We don't actually think we'll ever need for them to do anything, but obviously it acts as a deterrent. Yeah, we do have fresh water. Stanley is supplied by a spring up at the far end of town. We are quite dry here. We are classed as semi-desert actually, but Stanley is, because of the hills, it's actually the wettest part of the Falklands, and water very rarely provides too much of an issue. If you're on a farm, you have to have your own spring, or you have to have your own well. It's a lot harder. We're going to head out to East Stanley now. If you look on your right, you can see the peat banks. The system is that you would get allocated for free. You would be allocated your own peat bank, and essentially then it was up to you to go and carve out your own peat. So on peat cutting Monday, quite a few people do go out and just cut a few sods of peat just to for old time's sake. You can see on your left coming up what's known locally as the oil yard. That's all just been built in the last 2-3 years. Just a little bit about the potential oil industry. There's long been discussions that there was oil around these islands, but really technology was at such a state that it was all very theoretical. And although some surveying was done in the 1970s, it was deemed too complicated, too expensive to try and get the oil out of here. By the 1990s, technology really had moved on a lot, and we had our first exploratory rounds, drilling rounds in 1997, and they gave mixed results. So the oil companies went away and spent the next sort of 6-7 years doing very intensive seismic survey work, and returned here in 2010, 2011 to drill some more exploratory wells, and the results were a lot more satisfactory. So this area was laid down, and the next issue that we really have to discuss is the port facilities. If it happens, it will pretty well all be offshore. We're just coming into an area known as the Canache. It's sort of the cemetery for old yachts and old boats, but it's also where people who have yachts can berth them. We have people coming in during the summer. We have them coming in, people on their way to Antarctica, on their way to South Georgia, on their way to Ushuaia. They will call in here. And there we have the old bunkers as well from the Second World War. We weren't invaded at all during the Second World War. The battles were fought around the River Plate. As you can see, the Falklands are treeless, but we do have something like 256 different species of plants. Quite typical here, you can see the fern and a low-lying bush, which we call diddle-dee,